All right, here we go. Welcome back to the podcast today. I am super excited to introduce you to one of my friends, Jacy Lawler. She is the host of one of my favorite podcasts that I listen to on the regular called Have the Audacity. She is also the host and the creator, the founder of the Audacious Collective. And I'm also part of that. Part of that community. So I'm just super excited for our conversation today because I have a feeling it's going to go in a couple different directions, but all with the umbrella of talking about mindset. So I'm super excited to welcome Jacy to the podcast. So welcome, my friend.
Thank you so much for just having me on and all the sweet words you just said. I really appreciate it and your friendship. And when we talked about coming on, I was like, yes, why have we not done this sooner?
Oh,
Like, I am really excited for whatever this direction goes. And I agree, it'll probably go in a bunch of different directions. And I feel like our friendship is really going to come through, and it's going to feel like you, me, and the listener, like the three of us just sitting around talking.
yeah, I agree. And I want to give a little context too, just because I think it's really cool to share this is like how we connected, right? So if hopefully you remember, we go way back, right? Way back.
Ew.
God, it was what, 2020, I think, when we took that course. Was it 2020?
January of 20, was it
21,
21?
maybe
21,
21.
January of 21.
Yeah, 2021 January. Yeah, you and I were taking Corinne Angelica's course together, Mind Your Hormones. And I just remember meeting you and I was like, I feel like I'm going to be friends with her. But like, I remember I was still very like insecure and unsure of myself. And I could tell you at the time felt like kind of the same way. And it's really cool to see how both of us have gone just, in a couple of years, clearly, because it's still 2023, in like 2 years ish, three, how you and I have both evolved. And it just, I have to say, it's been super cool to watch you just like explode out of the shell. And like, you are just unapologetically you, not that you weren't then, but like, I just see the confidence radiating out of you. And the friendship that we have, is one of the most treasured friendships that, to be honest with you, that I have in my life. I mean, to be able to text you whenever I want, for you to, I just feel like you're almost kind of like, for me, a mama bear sometimes, like in the way that you treat me. And I hope I can give that to you too. But
Mhm.
the friendship we have is just, it's, words don't do justice, but it's a cool friendship and connection that you and I have made.
It is a very cool connection, and I do like our friendship is very special, and I cherish it as well. Like, I'm always like, I know I can tell Kelly any of my crazy ideas and she's gonna just be like, oh yeah, no, I can see it. I mean, you'll also be like, have you really thought this through? Um, but it's like an honest, safe space, and you're just like the most supportive friend, and I genuinely mean that I have and that I know. And so that means a lot to me. And what I think is, I remember when we met, and it was like one of the first calls. I mean, it was early in that program because that program was like 12 weeks long.
Yeah.
Um, that I remember being like, who is this person who just, like, to me, from an outsider's perspective, you looked very confident. Like, you were very confident in yourself and you knew who you were and like how you showed up. And I was like, this was my first online, like, really interaction with people. It was the first course I'd ever taken like an online course space. And so I just was like, you looked very sure of yourself. I was like, she is way cooler than me and way more outgoing. And I just am like, I don't know. I just was, and that was in my time when I was like, I'll just be small and sit back. Cause I'm like, she's too cool. She does not want to be friends with me. She's gonna think I'm weird
Oh Lord.
and dorky. And but yes, but watching you grow has been so cool. Cause even when I see that, like, you've just exploded and grown so much in your self-confidence, and I see that as well.
Well, thank you. I mean, our feelings are mutual. So
Mhm.
I think, again, like we said, it's going to come out, our connection in this chat. It already has, but I think today it would be awesome for us to talk about really your evolution in terms of mindset, because to your point, yeah, back then, a couple of years ago, your mindset was a lot different than it is now. And so I would love for you to share that journey. And I know that's going to be a little bit of a longer story, but I think it's really important that women hear that, because as I told you before we hopped on the mic, there's a lot of similarities in your story to mine. Like there's a lot of connections. And I think women that are listening are going to find and watching are going to find a lot of parallels between your story and theirs. And it's important that we share that, because I think so often we feel as women that we're alone and that we're the only ones feeling the way that we are. And we're the only ones that have ever experienced the things that we've experienced. And in reality, most of the things that we've experienced, other people have too. And we just either are not, again, confident, not willing to, or just feel like, I'm going to use the Gen Z term, like cringe, we just feel like people are gonna, like, it's too cringeworthy to share. Right. But I think in sharing it, that the power lies in your story and in the connection that it can bring to other women that can see, like, wow, look at the transitional period that she's gone through, and look at the transformation that she's had. I can do it too. Like you are bringing hope and, just really peace of mind to women who are scared shitless, for lack of a letter, lack of a better way to say it, So if you don't mind, I would love for you to share just your journey through, the lowest of the lows to now where you're able to really pinpoint, how you're feeling and how to cope with things when times get rough, because they do. And so, how have you transitioned to this, I'm going to say, newer version of you, this more confident and wiser version?
Well, no pressure. That was like a great setup. I'm like, okay, everybody
Pressure.
buckle up.
Here we go.
Buckle up. It is gonna be a bit of a story because I
Yeah.
don't want to gloss over any like parts that I think are really important that you can see in. And you and I talked before we hopped on, and I was like, I don't mind kind of getting into some of the nitty gritty of it, because I have gotten so much value, and what helped me along the way was hearing other women share their stories,
Yeah.
because to your point, there is so much power in it.
Yeah.
And so here we go. Context to the story. We won't go all the way back to childhood, but I need to establish that I grew up a people pleaser. That was how I controlled my environment. Was keeping everybody happy, and that was how I earned love. To my parents, wouldn't say consciously knew that. It was just a narrative that, at a very formative age, like, how you're going to see the world by age 7. So at some point in my underdeveloped frontal cortex mind, I decided that I needed to please people for them to like me. And so that was there. And that was also with being a high achiever. And so I had all of these things going in, and I always wanted to be a teacher and was told I would be a great teacher. You would be great at it. You're great with kids. Like, you're great at school. That was one thing. I was a great student. It's like, you're a great student. You'll be a great teacher. And I had a lot of people in my life tell me that was what they saw for me that I would excel in. And so I went to college, and I was a first generation college student, and became a teacher. I started my first job at 21 because I have an August birthday. So I technically started at 21 and like turned 22 like shortly after. And by my second year, like 23, 24 years old, I started my 3rd year of teaching and was like, what the heck? I did it. Like, I accomplished, this was your one goal. This was all I wanted.
Yeah.
And this was all I worked for. So what do I do now? And that too was kind of like compounded with, like, I live in small town Texas, and I mean, even I feel like this is a pretty common belief system that our society subscribes to in a lot of places in our country, of like getting married young. And so I was already panicked that by college I wasn't married. And so then I'm in this career, I have this thing, and I'm in an unhealthy relationship because I like need to check off all the boxes. I'm like, I have the career, check. Need the relationship, it's horrible, I'm miserable, but check, I have it. and realized I was very unhappy, but didn't really know what to do because I had spent my life doing all the things that I was taught would make me feel fulfilled and happy. And so in that, I was like, okay, what do I do? I went to school for teaching. I spent all this money on student loans to become a teacher, so I can't walk away from this, and I'm successful at it. I mean, to everybody's point, I'm not ashamed to say like I can get kids good test scores. I'm very good at teaching. There's a lot of like teacher brain that comes very naturally to me to get kids to understand things. It's not hard for me. I did spend a lot of time learning it and perfecting like the craft of it, but it does come very natural to me. And but I was like, this isn't challenging anymore. And so like in this process, I was like, okay, let's go to school. What does society tell you to do? Like, go get another degree. So I was like, all right, let's go get a master's degree. Meanwhile, that relationship, thank God, it imploded. And but then that kind of I mentioned that because it attributed to me feeling like a failure. Because now I'm like, shoot, I'm 24 and single. Like, this is over for me. My 30-year-old self is like, you were crazy. You're a 24-year baby. Like, chill out.
Yeah.
But, you know, at the same time that this was happening, my 19-year-old sister got married. And so I was like, she was getting married as my relationship ended. And I was like, it was a very weird time. Not that I was jealous of her or anything like that. I was very supportive, very happy. But I was dealing with my own like narrative telling of what does this mean about me?
Yeah.
And I was making it mean that there was something wrong with me. And so I got the college degree. If you know anything about the field of education, there's not a lot of opportunity to move up. You need a master's degree to move up, but there's not a lot of opportunity to do so. And so I did it and was like, wow, I'm still unfulfilled. So we're like to 2019 at this point, and I was like, okay, let's switch careers. Like, let's switch grade levels. Maybe that's it. We're bored in the same grade level because I've consistently for several years have gotten great test scores. And I'm like, this is easy for me. Like, I feel like I've hacked the system. So maybe we need a new challenge. Let's try that. So I go from 4th grade to kindergarten, and let me tell you, can I cuss on this podcast?
Yeah.
I refer to kinder as kinder hell. That was a really bad year for me. And because, you know, I went through this relationship demise and like that was fine. My life was kind of moving forward, but I lost my grandparent, and it was the first grandparent I had ever lost in April. School ended in May. I moved to kindergarten. By October, I lost my other grandparent. Second person I'd ever lost. Was dealing with starting over. And mind you, you know, I said that I had been feeling like I had peaked for a while now. So I was dealing with depression, but wasn't acknowledging that what it was. I had anxiety, but wasn't acknowledging it. And, you know, you go through grief for the first time, twice very close together. Then I had lost an aunt a month later, and then my best friend lost her mom at Christmas. And I was in a very dark place. But I didn't allow myself to deal with my emotions in any of that because I felt like I had to show up. Like, I didn't lose my mom. My mom's still alive. So, you know, that comparison where you're like, okay, like I can't feel bad about what I'm going through because people have it worse.
Yeah.
And this was December of 2019, and then we all know what happened in March of 2020. And at that point, I was envisioning just like walking out of work. Like, I was in such a dark place. I was like, I don't care. Middle of the day, like I'm just gonna leave and not come back. And I And I knew, like, depression was something I had dealt with for a long time, but I had thought I had it under control, and I was off medication and was like, "No, it's fine, like, that was just a period of my life, I'm great now," and I wouldn't acknowledge that that was there, and so then by the time 2020 happened, I was so riddled with anxiety, I didn't go inside of a store for 4 months.
Wow.
I had a panic attack the first time I went into a store,
Wow.
the summer. In Texas, we went back to school face to face, um, in August where I live, like, we went straight back into it, but, like, cut to, like, during that time we were at home with all the things going on, and I was very stressed and depressed about what was going on, and I realized, like, I cannot watch the news, I do not need this much negativity in my brain all the time to feed it. I was also simultaneously doing better because I wasn't at school anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Like, when people were like, "Oh, I'm sad, like, I miss the kids, and I miss being back at work," and I don't feel awful saying this because it's my truth and where I was at the time. I was like, "No, I'm glad we're not there."
Yeah.
Like, I needed us not to be there. I needed out of that, and so, I came back and we started talking about reopening schools, and my boss was like, "Okay, are you staying in kinder?" And I was like, "Well, heck no. That was miserable, not repeating that. Obviously, everything going wrong is not my mental health, it's kinder's fault." So, I was moved to a 3rd grade reading position, and I never taught 3rd grade reading because when I was in 4th grade, I taught math, and I was the only 3rd grade reading teacher on our campus. And I was like, "Okay, cool. So I don't know what I'm doing. Never done this before. I have nobody to rely on." Cut to, I've already started having panic attacks because of what's going on in the world. And I very quickly started having multiple panic attacks a day from the stress of trying to figure out work. And, I was very depressed and wasn't dealing with it. And the breaking point and like the rock bottom in the story would be, it was like October of 2020. I was in class teaching. The kids were fine. The kids had no idea, like, they're living their best life. And I felt a panic attack coming and I couldn't stove it off. And I popped my head out the door and I saw one of my friends walking down the hallway. And I was like, "Hey, can you cover my class?" And they were like, "You don't look good. Are you okay?" And I said, "No, I'm not okay, but I need you to stay in there with them because I cannot be in there right now." And then I had one of the worst, scariest panic attacks I'd ever had in my life. And it took like 30 minutes for me to get myself back together. And I went back to class. Kids had no idea, as they shouldn't, but you just keep on going. And in that moment, I realized, like, "Ooh, I can't continue like this. I need to do something." And so, and this is from somebody who, like, in a trigger warning way, at 17 had suicidal thoughts. And so I recognized that I cannot continue down the path I'm going because I know where it leads.
Yeah.
And that was where I really, like, found personal development, and I got into therapy. And, we just talked about the top of this episode how you met me in January of 21. And I didn't tell anybody where I was at.
Yeah.
Like, when we met, I was still having panic attacks and still trying to learn how to cope with them and process through things and learn to get to know myself in a way that I could create a life that was supportive. And so I always think it's very interesting with that, like, you never know what people are going through and what they're dealing with.
Absolutely.
Um and so, like, I know this has been like a long sense to it to like get to this point, but I really want to share like all the pieces, how it's not one moment where like life will derail you. It's a series of moments that you choose not to deal with. And I learned in that feelings demand to be felt. And if you ignore them, they're just going to get louder. And so a lot in my talks and things when I talk about this and I share this story is like, you have to learn to befriend those things. If you have anxiety, you have to learn to befriend it.
Yeah.
The depression is there. Like, you have to learn to befriend it. You have to befriend your emotions. Like, they don't get to drive in the driver's seat anymore, because at the time I very much felt like a victim of my own mind.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't head off panic attacks. I didn't know what was causing them. I didn't really know how to be happy. And like that's where I was at. And so the first tool that really changed everything for me was I learned how to rewire my brain, and I really dove into that and how to build habits that and kind of hack your brain in a way of things it's already doing, but do it in a way that's going to serve you. And so like I started daily gratitude practice. I know like people roll your eyes because a lot of people talk about it like, oh, do you have gratitude practice? Like, okay, yes, because it's important. It's like the easiest thing to do. So it's also the easiest thing not to do. And so my therapist really challenged me. And thank God I had her, because I was with her for almost 2 years. And um, this was the first thing she did. And she's like, I was like, this is stupid. I told her that. It's like one of our first sessions. And I was like, this is dumb. I'm telling you right now, this is dumb. And she was like, okay, well, like, just give it 30 days. Give me 30 days and let's see where we're at. And so we talked about the whole psychology of like, your brain will look for whatever you tell it to look for. And so if you wake up and say today is going to be a bad day, your brain's literally going to scan the whole day and only remember the things that support that today's bad. You hear people talking about, oh, like the world is awful now. And then you're going to list off the reasons why things are awful, because your brain's only going to look for those things and ignore everything that is why there's still good happening in the world.
Right.
And so I really started with this. What am I grateful for today? Like, what are small moments in that one day that I'm grateful for? And it allowed me to start seeing the good, because I didn't see the good anymore. And from there, the piece that has become like my superpower in it, and it's so simple, was I started tracking my moods. This was like the next step that we added in. And people look at me like, okay, like you see on Etsy or Pinterest and you're like, oh, like all these fancy mood charts. Like, no, I have a blank page journal. I write mood. I write an overall how I'm feeling for the day, maybe a couple, and then like my 3 gratitudes for the day. And what I learned was doing that for 30 days and looking back retrospectively was that if I got tired turned to exhausted. I'd be exhausted for a few days, and then I would start to be depressed. I start to feel depressed, and all of a sudden I'm starting to feel anxious. And this tool that is so simple allowed me to see like, oh, sleep is very important to me and I cannot compromise that. Because my ability to handle anything else and to use any of the other tools out there is dependent on how well I'm sleeping. And it's that self-awareness piece. And, you know, it was like through this, I found personal development, and we became like connected in, you know, other podcast communities, and really started to grow and learn and dive into this and, you know, deal with all the things that I got to a place where I could feel an anxiety attack coming and I would be able to head like to stop it.
Yeah.
And like my go-to thing when I would have them was like, I can't breathe. I'd always just start like, I can't breathe. I feel like I can't breathe. And I'd start panicking that I couldn't breathe. And it just becomes this vicious cycle. And I remember like, no, you can breathe. And so like getting that self-awareness and feeling empowered and control was what helped me move through that. And, you know, cut to that took a year. I'm not going to sugarcoat that this was like, oh, in 90 days I was better. Like I don't even want to use the word better, but that I had control over it. It was a process and it's still a process. So, I mean, those are things I still do now. I'm still very mindful of my sleep and I have to be very careful. And for other things, like talk about on here, my circadian rhythm is very sensitive. Like, I'm definitely one of those people. You know, some people can stay up late one night and then they're fine the next day. They can go to bed early. It's fine. Like, if I stay up till midnight, the next time I'm gonna have to slowly work my way back down. It's gonna take a week to get back to where I needed because it's so sensitive.
Yeah.
But I know that about myself now. And when you know it, you're like empowered with the tools to like take charge of it and you don't feel like your life's running you. And it was from those places that like have the audacity came from. And like building this life on your own terms, because I realized the more I learned and the more I was like, I wish I had these tools. I wish somebody had told me these tools 10 years ago. Why are people not talking about this more? And so then I was telling it to everybody that I knew. People talk about something, oh, well, have you thought about this? Or no, like the power of your words. Like there's so many things we could get into with this because it's such a huge layered cake.
Yeah.
But and like that's where it came from, and that's now where I love getting to talk about it.
Yeah.
Because I know, like, I share all those parts of my story that you can find yourself in one of them
Mhm.
or in multiple points of it.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's all you need to know you're not alone.
Yep.
That you're not the first person who's felt this feeling, and you're not going to be the last person who's felt this. Even though society sometimes and your brain loves to tell you that you are, that you're alone in this. And you're not. And I don't want to say like, oh, I don't have any issues now. Like people pass away, high stress events happen to me, and I'm fine. Nothing phases me. No, it's still a process and I still have to work at it. And if I stop doing the things I know to do that are going to help me, then yeah, the wheels are going to start falling off again because those are just things I have to do, and that's fine. Like everybody has to work at something. Contrary to whatever you're seeing on the internet, like nobody wakes up and like their life is great, their mindset's great, their mood's great. No, their health is great. Like it's all a lie. Nothing is Amazon Prime instant.
Yeah.
We all have to have habits and structure our days in ways that support us.
Yeah.
And the only way you know how to do that is gaining the self-awareness around it. And because we're friends, I recently just went through a couple weeks ago from when we were recording this. I had a family member in the hospital and they were very sick, and it was a very stressful time, but I knew it didn't make it easier. And that was one thing, like I heard Mel Robbins say, and that mindset won't save you, but it'll keep life from derailing you. And I thought that was so powerful because it's true. Like it didn't save me from feeling those emotions. It didn't save me from being worried about them, being sad, being angry. Like I ran the whole gamut of emotions that you would when somebody you love is in that position. But what it did do was it allowed me to navigate it without like I wasn't back into not being able to get out of bed.
Yeah.
I was still able to function and show up in the world and do the things and take care of myself because I know that's what I needed. If I was going to show up for them, I needed to take care of myself, and now I have the tools to do that. And I came out of it, and for a listener listening, they were in the hospital for a week. They're home now. They're doing much better. But for a few days, it was really scary. And I didn't know if they were going to come home. And I haven't told you this, but a few days after they were home, I had a panic attack one morning. I haven't had one in like a year and a half. And I had a moment where I was telling myself that I had failed and that I was wrong, that I was dealing with this. that I knew better. Like you allowed yourself to get back into this place. But then because of all the work that I've put in, the next thought was, because I always there's a lot of power in knowing that your first thought is your conditioning, the second thought is you. So my first thought was that you're a failure, that you let yourself get into this position again. But my second thought was, no, this is a normal response to the high stress that you've been under. You have the tools to work through it in this moment and to keep moving forward. And so I did. I grabbed some sour candy. I keep, for if you have anxiety, a hack is I keep individual packages of sour straws. And sour candy will like snap you out of it. I
Wow.
don't know all the like good medical jargon. I'm not the like expert on that, like to explain it in a eloquent way. But it'll get your brain focused on the sour. Like it like shocks, it's almost like a shock to your nervous system.
Sure.
And so like I keep little showers and I was like, okay, grab it. Like, you know what you're doing? Like I had sat down and like had started like sinking into it. And I was like, no, we can get ourselves out of it. We know the tools. And then I shut down I like went to work and did my 9 to 5 job, but I was like, okay, I'm coming home and resting for like the next 3 or 4 days. And I would just come home and veg out and sleep and whatever felt good to me, color, read, like go on walks, like whatever felt good. I didn't put any expectations on it for a few days and I came out of it. And I was like, okay, that's what I needed. And so I want to share that because I don't want you to think like, oh, she has her life together. Like, oh, this was horrible. You went through all that and you learned all the ways to fix it. And now you share it and you help other women navigate through things. But you obviously don't ever experience anything. Like, no, it's still there. I still experience it and deal with it. But I have the tools to move through it.
Yeah.
And so that was a very long, thank you for making it through, but like how I got to where I am now.
Yeah, and it was much needed. So I mean, again, thank you for sharing all of the pieces and parts of that entire journey because again, as to your point and mine earlier, you can find, you the listener, you the person who's watching right now, can find yourself in one or many parts of Jacy's story. I mean, as you were sharing that, most of that I already knew because we're friends and you shared that with me, but there are so many parallels to your story and mine. And so again, for those of us that are thinking we're the only ones, you're not. Like we've all been through these hard times. The biggest thing I hope that you take away from Jacy's story is that she's found ways to support herself. Like in just watching Jacy share that too, like Jacy, the confidence on your face of just like, you're like a mama bear. Like when you talk about it, it's like, I know what to do for myself. Like you're a mother to yourself. Right. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's the most important thing we need to realize about ourselves is that like, first you come home to yourself. Right. And
Mm-hmm.
then to everybody else. Like if you can't take care of you, how the hell are you going to try and support anyone else? Like, you know, your family member, how could you have supported that individual if you weren't right yourself, right? Like if your mindset wasn't in the place to be able to support that individual, it
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't have happened, right? And so you had to do what was necessary to support yourself in feeling like you could get through not only that journey of what was happening, you know, all along with that individual, but then ultimately to be able to show up for that individual too and let them know that you were there and you know could be there in any way to support. I think a lot of times as a chronic people pleaser, a recovering people pleaser, like yourself, you know, I feel a lot of that of like, I want to show up for people. But again, you can't do that if you are not mentally, physically, holistically right yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You know, nothing's going to change if you don't change first. You know, if you
Mm-hmm.
want your relationships to change with other people, if you want to find a new job, you know, whatever it is, nothing's going to change unless you look at yourself, from the inside out first and say, okay, these are the things that I'm struggling with and dealing with, instead of shoving it under the rug, which so many of us do. And it's common practice because we're not taught how to deal with any of these things. Again, a knock on education, but like that was never taught to us in any of our schooling, K through 12. But we're essentially just, left to our own devices and shove things under the rug, which is why, so many times we take on so many things, or we take on more than we can handle. And then we're like, well, now what? Now I'm burnt out because I'm doing too much. But the reality is we took on all the stuff to numb, right? To get away from pain, get away from the uncomfortableness of what you shared, actually letting those emotions take hold in your body, like, to be present in your body and to then let your body work through them is the key. But that's what you did, and that's what you're currently doing and still doing. But that's what so many of us don't want to do, because guess what? It's freaking hard, right? And who wants to do something that's hard? It's like saying, oh, well, I could, go to the store and actually drive there and get groceries, or I could just order it on, one of the apps, right? And, just have it delivered to my door. It's like, which one do you want to do? Well, if you have the money and you have the resources, then maybe you have it delivered. But many of us, have to go and get it from the store. But it's like, okay, do you want the easy way out or the hard way out of this? The hard way is to actually move through it and process it so that you can actually learn to deal with those things and learn that it's a natural part of your being. Whereas if you go the quote unquote easy way, which is really not easy in the long run, you're going to be there forever, because you're going to be going through this constant burnout cycle and this constant perpetual negativity, because you're taking on too much, you're doing too much, you're not feeling into who you are and what you really want to do. And so you're always feeling like, well, gosh darn, like, when am I going to catch a break?
Well, yes. And to your point, like what we think is the easy way out and society tells us is the easy way out, because we do numb ourselves with busyness. I numbed myself for a long time with busyness. And
I'll have.
And even like and I feel like that's the most common way we numb. I mean, people numb with shopping, people numb with substances, people numb with relationships. You can numb with just about anything, like spending a lot of time on your phone, numbing with games, like anything you can choose to numb to not face it. And, in the moment, that's an easy decision, because then you don't have to face it. Because like to what you said, none of that was easy.
Yeah.
None of facing any of it was easy. I am a huge proponent of people going to therapy, and I spent the first 6 months crying after every one and was emotionally exhausted. Because of like what I needed to process and what I needed to go through. But like it was worth it in the end to do that. But the thing with numbing and all of these other, like taking the easy way out of it in the moment to avoid, it's still going to be there. In the end, you're going to have to deal with it. If you want to move forward, the only way through it is just to face it. I mean, because you think like you were like talking about being busy and all those things. Well, it's like going to keep showing up. And you're like, okay, let's turn this way and run this way. And then boom, it pops up there. Like it's not going away. You're eventually going to have to face it. Do you want to face it now? Or do you want to face it 10 years from now, when who knows the trail of destruction that's happened in your life because of it, with your health, with relationships, your finances, whatever it is. Because to what I said, like feelings demand to be felt, and they'll just get bigger until you face them. And that was where like I've come to like making friends with it. I'm like, you're not in charge. Like, thank you. Because I have a lot of time, like my anxiety is still there. It's quieter most of the time, but if I start getting tired or too busy, like it shows up, and I'm like, thank you, but like, no, thank you. I appreciate you trying to keep us safe, but that's not what we're doing. Like, I appreciate that you think this is going to keep us safe, but we're not listening to that. Like, I'm driving. Like, you're in the back seat. Thank you for your input, but that's all you got is input. But if you ignore it, then it yells and throws a fit and drive, and then you end up making some horrible, irrational decision in the moment where you're super reactive to something. And you look back and you're like, why did I respond like that?
Right.
Because I know we've all had those moments where we lose it. And afterwards, you're like embarrassed because you're like, I know that was too much.
Yeah.
I'm very much aware that was too much. Why did I do that? Well, probably because you didn't acknowledge the feeling behind it. And it, in this scenario, hijacked the car.
Yeah.
And then you're like, wait, what the heck happened? Because you weren't in control of it, you know? And so, and like, that's part of being human. And, but again, it's the things we're not taught. We're not taught how to do this until you don't learn these tools until you hit the point where you desperately need them. And I appreciate like you saying like I have mama bear energy. I'm an Enneagram 8. And so I think it really comes through because I'm like, that's where I've gotten to where I am now. I'm like, I have to tell everybody, we're not going to hit rock bottom before we learn these tools.
Yeah.
We're going to get out ahead of this.
And I love that. I love that about you. And gosh, my analogy was so god awful with the grocery shopping, but I love the car analogy. That was spot on. Like that's exactly what you've learned to do, is to take hold of the steering wheel, so to speak, and be the driver and let those emotions process, but then let them sit in the back seat, because you're ultimately making the decisions, not not all the other pieces and parts that are coming up and are trying to take over when the going gets rough, or when there's something that triggers you from a past experience, right? So I think anyone can try to latch on, or could latch on pretty easily to that analogy of, okay, crap, I gotta, be in the driver's seat. And to your point, yeah, you gotta learn like how to do that, right? You're not going to, most likely, if you're not in a situation where it's dire, you're not going to willingly be like, oh yeah, let's go ahead and learn how to do that, right? It usually happens when you've exhausted all other options and you're like, I don't know, there's no other way but up, right? I mean, at least that's where I was, in my journey. I mean, I'm not going to go down that path today because this is about you and I want to give you your time. But that for me was like my experience of like, I am at such a low, there's no possible way to be any lower. Like the only way is up. And the only way to get me out of the way that I'm feeling and this negativity that's running my life is to seek out help and to seek out strategies and to seek out support. Because again, to your point, we can't do it alone all the time. We need other people. We need people that are qualified to listen to us and to hear what we have to say and to help us process. And sometimes processing ourselves works, and that's great. And other times we need some outside perspective to help us process through what we're feeling, because we've heard ourselves say it over and over and over again. And we're like, well, there can only be one way to, process this or to think about the situation. But then you have somebody else come in with a whole new perspective. And it's kind of like, when you're trying to figure out how to do something and someone says, well, why don't you just do it that way? And you're like, crap, I've been thinking like of all these ways and you just brought up this idea, and why didn't I think of it? Right. But it's like the more heads together, the better, because you've got these other thoughts and ways of thinking, and that person is not dealing with your situation. So they're not in the thick of it. So they can be on the outside, looking in and say, okay, like I can kind of help you process this. Let's see, like maybe, maybe you're feeling this way because of X, Y, and Z. And, then start helping you to work through coping strategies or processing strategies. And so I think, there's a lot to be said, like you mentioned, seeking outside help, which I know you do that. You have that as a, a regular part of your routine. So do I. So, for anyone listening, I mean, if you haven't gone down that route and you're right here, right now, feeling like you're in the thick of it, I would tell you to go out and seek support if you feel that's the next right step, because there's somebody out there that can help you, that can support you, and you shouldn't feel like you are the only one and like you're, a mess, and there's no way out for you, because there is. Jacy and
Mhm.
I were both at one time at rock bottom. We're not
Mhm.
anymore. Like, hello, we're both thriving over here. So, if this is a testament, hopefully this is a testament for you to say, okay, two women here have gone through the thick of it and they've come out the other side. And sure, are there times where they go back and are in the thick of it again? Yeah, that is part of life. But we both
Mhm.
have developed strategies and support systems to allow us to come back from those things a lot quicker and
Mhm.
in a lot more effective manner. So all that to say, like, thank you for sharing your story, and just, I think, giving women, someone to look to that is relatable. Because I mean, again, I see you in so much of myself. And so I appreciate you sharing that story. And now, to kind of turn things a little bit to the other end of the spectrum, I would love for us to kind of round out this conversation with talking about, just the decade that we're in. Like, we're both in our 30s now, and
Mhm.
I know I've shared with you, and I know you just turned 30, a couple months, you're a couple months into it now. And I've shared with you that I love my 30s. Like, I'm 33, so I'm a couple years in, and I know when I went from 29 to 30, I just felt like this whole new sense of, like, almost like a fresh, clean slate, but at the same time, like, so much more confidence in myself too. And I know you said that at the time you met me, which I wasn't in my 30s. You thought I was confident. And that was kind of the beginnings of this. But like, I don't know if it's just like a switch flips or what, but I just feel like when you approach the 30-year mark, you start not giving a crap about what other people think, and you realize that all the things that you went through in your teens and your 20s, like, were meant for you to grow through those things. They were learning lessons. And
Mhm.
I mean, as much as I would have loved to have learned some of those lessons earlier, I think we all would, they allowed me to step into this next decade and be like unapologetically myself. I think is the best way to describe
Mhm.
that. So I would love to hear your take on it, especially since you're fresh into this decade, and just like, yeah, like, just tell us how you're feeling, and like how you did feel in your 20s, and now what renewed sense of optimism and just, the feelings you feel now that you've entered the decade of your 30s.
Well, I turned 30 a couple months ago. I dyed my hair red. I dyed my hair red. I turned 30. I felt like it was a whole new thing. And I was very excited. I always thought, especially when I was in my early 20s, that when I turned 30, I was going to be like terrified, like getting older and scared of getting older. And I feel like you have two roads you can take. Like, you can either embrace it and own it, or you can spend your time wishing you were young again and acting like you were, and you're not. And honestly, like, you could not pay me to go back. I'm like, no, thank you. I love it. Learn so much, but I appreciate who I am now, and that I know who I am,
Yeah.
and that I don't care what people say. I'm like, I don't care anymore. Like, I tried it out in my 20s, putting other people's thoughts and needs before my own, and that did not wind me up in a very good spot.
Yeah.
So, we're not doing that anymore. And I wish I could attribute who I heard this person say this, but it was like on Instagram a reel of somebody's talk. I can't remember the name of the person. They were talking about how your 20s are like your infant years of adult. So,
Mm.
like, if you think about it, 20 is like 0, you're a baby adult. And so, like, by 30, you're like 10. You're finally like, why do we think people are supposed to have their lives figured out in their 20s and make all these big major life decisions in their 20s? You don't know who you are. You're a little infant adult. You
Right.
don't know what's going on. You've never done this before. You're still trying to figure it out.
I love that.
And so, like, there was just so much, like, freedom and, like, okay, everybody's 20s is a mess. And, you know, like, I talked about the narrative I used to tell myself and that I grew up around was like, "Oh, I'll be married and have kids by the time I'm 30. Like, I should be done having kids by 30." Holy crap. No, thank you. And, like, you and I talk about, like,
Yeah.
we don't want kids.
Right.
Don't want it for me. I'm
Right.
not married. I don't feel like I'm less valuable of a human because I'm not married at 30. I'm just like, "Yeah, I'm not married. That's fine." I
Yeah.
don't care. Like, I don't care. And just, like, the freedom of not caring, I think is, like, my most favorite. But I do agree with you, there was, like, a switch, because even how I show up online now is different. Like, I don't know what portal you enter when you turn 30, but there is a confident and just a I don't give enough attitude
Yeah.
of, like, I'm very sure of who I am, and I know who I am, and I also know enough to know that in 10 years, I'm gonna look back at 30-year-old me and be like, "You didn't really know."
Yeah, well, that's what I was gonna say next too, is like I'm sure that once we approach the 40-year mark, like we will feel even more confident. I feel like it goes up from here, right? The trajectory is only upwards in terms of the confidence that you build because you're here for longer on this planet and you develop even more self-awareness of who you are and what you want. Because again, to your point earlier, and the way that I feel too, it's like when you're, in your teens and early 20s, you think you know what you want. Like you think you're going to school for the right thing. You think that this path that you're creating for yourself is the path that's going to, take you all the way to retirement. But reality, like in this day and age, in 2020 era and beyond, that isn't the average. That isn't the norm anymore. That was for our parents, for many of our parents, that was like you do a job and by golly, you do that forever until you retire. But I think the world we live in now promotes the idea of it's okay to change your mind again and again and again, because as a human being, our parents wise, and us living in this current reality, everybody changes. And it
Mhm,
almost makes me sad to think that, like, and I've never had this conversation with my dad, but now it prompts me to want to. It makes me sad that, like, God, my dad did what he did for so long. Like, did he ever want to change and do something else? But I almost feel like it was wired in that generation to do
mhm,
that and to, nope, sorry, we got to pay bills, we got to provide for the family. Like, put you last, like everybody, again, to this whole people pleaser mentality.
mhm,
Everybody else comes before you. And I think, at least for me, my 30s have also brought that awareness, is that I do come first and it's not a selfish thing. It's, if I want to show up for the people that I love, then I have to do what I need for myself first. And if that means somebody wants me to come and speak, or somebody wants me to come and, watch them, play a game, or, even my family wants me to come and, do something. If I'm not right, right? If I don't have the rest that I need, or, the self-care that I need that day, it's not selfish for me to say, you know what, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to make it to that thing, or I'm not going to be able to do that thing. Because the last thing I want to do is show up half-ass
mhm,
and not truly, put all of myself into whatever that is that I'm wanting to give myself to. So I think, and I can sit here and say that, and I'm sure many, many people have heard that again and again and again, but that's because it's the reality. It's the truth. If you want to give all yourself to the people that you love and to the things that you care about, you got to take a step back and make sure that you have protected your peace, that you have supported yourself, right? In order to show up for those people 110%.
mhm. And it's just how, like, I mean, to echo what you said, how society has been structured. I mean, if you think about it, even we've talked about in this conversation a lot about how you're not taught emotional awareness or self-awareness in school. Like, mm-mm, that's not important to society. But I mean, if you think about it, and putting yours and there, you're taught to put yourself first. and from a very scarcity place. Like, I mean, you think about it like with a, you hear everybody hears the analogy. You can't pour from an empty cup. I mean, because like reality, you can't generate more if there's nothing left.
Yeah.
But if you stay in that place and you operate in that place where you're not aware of your emotions and you're just setting yourself on fire to keep other people warm,
Yep.
then you're not in your most empowered place.
Yep.
And really, and this can be controversial to say this, but I very much believe in it, is that society doesn't want a lot of empowered people running around.
Yeah.
Like,
That's the
it
truth.
wouldn't work well for the current structure.
Yep.
And it would keep you playing small. And like, so I think about, we always talk about pour from an empty cup. Like, that's a very scarcity mindset. Like, you have a finite amount of resources, so save some for yourself. But I really like thinking about it like, and I don't know why this is what came to my mind first, but like a champagne glass pyramid. And like, you pour the top one and then it just flows down, and you're never actually concerned about the first one running out.
Yeah.
You only pour into the first one and it will just flow down and trickle down to all the other ones.
Yeah.
And you never lose any. You're just constantly overflowing. And like, looking at it from that space of like saying no and taking time for yourself, and changing your mind,
Yeah.
saying yes, I'm going to go watch your game, and then getting close to that game and something happened that week and you have been sick and you're like, no, like, I know deep down I need to not do this for
Yeah.
me, and just be like, I'm sorry, I know I said I could, but things have changed and I'm not gonna be able to make it, and not making that mean anything negatively about you.
Right.
But you have to take care of yourself first, because
Yeah.
if you think about it, on the whole, we hear a lot too with the you set yourself on fire to keep everybody else warm. If you think about anything burning, eventually it can't burn anymore. There's just ash.
Yep.
And there's nothing left. Like, is that what you want?
Right. Yeah. We're burning the candle at both ends, right? And eventually
Like,
there will be. Yeah.
eventually you'll have nothing left.
Your
And
visual imagery is just like on fire today. Like, I'm loving this because my brain is like soaking it all up. And I know that those that are listening and watching are like, yeah, this, like, I'm getting this. This is making total sense. But like, every visual piece of imagery that you've given has just been like so super supportive to this whole conversation. And it just really drives the point home, you know?
well, thank you. And that's just how I think, very visually.
Yeah.
And that's just how, like, I hear stories and I think of things. Like, I'm a very visual person, and so I feel like it's a tangible piece to help everybody connect to. So I appreciate that it's received and beneficial and helpful.
It 100% is. The teacher in me says thank you for adding those, because clearly mine is not spot on today. So my apologies on that. on that end. But as we wrap up, Jacy, this is, gosh, we're gonna have to do this again because this has been fantastic. Like, just everything that you've shared, I know has been supportive for me, and just relating to you even more, and understanding how even more so our paths are paralleled. But I again want to keep reiterating that you sharing and being so vulnerable on this episode today, like in this conversation, is going to help so many women, like, for time and time again to come, because people need to hear this, and it's hard to talk about. But when you share like you did, real, raw and vulnerable, it just unlocks so much more potential for other people to do the same for themselves. So I can't thank you enough for sharing today what you've shared. And as we wrap up, if you wouldn't mind just sharing the current things that women can do to be in your sphere and connected with you, as well as ways to connect with you, I think that would be wonderful.
Well, thank you so much for all your kind words and for inviting me on and giving me the space to share my story. I really do appreciate that. To connect with me, I'm on Instagram. That's like exclusively the social media platform. I'm big on like, do things that light you up, and if it doesn't, don't do it out of obligation. So I like Instagram right now, and that's where I hang out at. And I'm sure like we can link it in the show notes, but it's just, my handle's just at Jacy Lawler. I, like you mentioned at the top of the episode, I have a community, an online community, the Audacious Collective. I have fully embraced to have the Audacity brand.
Come join us.
Because I think yes, come join us. And it's just really a place for women who don't want to do this alone. Like we have these type of conversations and can be very real and very honest and bring in guest speakers. And I have a lot of fun things planned that Kelly doesn't even know about coming in 2024. So like it's just a very empowering place because we're not meant to do life alone, and online spaces have helped transform my life so much that I really wanted to have that. And so there's that option. And then I also offer one-on-one coaching. I take on a limited amount of clients. So I have a wait list at a time just to protect my own energy, as we've talked about a lot today, taking care of yourself so you can show up for others. So I can send you, we can link the wait list in the show notes for that. So that way you can know like when a spot opens up. But I do that 3 months at a time. I really think 90 days is like a good time to kind of see, and you can always extend it. But it really is time to figure out what's going on, implement changes, and have time to see how it goes and correct. But those are like my 2 main offers. And then of course I have the Audacity podcast, which is going to be 1 year soon.
Woo!
On 11/11, because I'm obnoxious, it will be 1 year. And on Christmas Day is going to be, like, you're listening to this before December 25th of 23, will be the 100th episode. And I'm going to have I have something big planned for being a 100 episode.
Oh,
And I cannot wait for it to come out. So a lot of things coming, of course. There's all the ways to find it, and we'll have it in the show notes for you. But yeah, that's how you can find me and get in my world.
absolutely. Geez, so many good things. And again, I can't reiterate enough. Join the community. Duh. What are you waiting for? And 2, the podcast. I mean, ladies, the podcast is a no-brainer. I listen to that podcast every single week. It is in my queue. It's already downloaded. I just press play and boom. I love the solos. I love when you bring on guests. It's again, if you felt like you were chatting with a friend today with JC and I, which I feel like, how could you not? Because she's just that kind of girl. Like, that's how you're going to feel with the podcast. She is just so down to earth, so relatable. And again, 100% authentically her. How could you not love her? Like, hello.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. But yeah, like Kelly said, I have 2 episodes a week. Monday's always solo episode. Thursdays solo or a guest. I've done more solo episodes lately because I've just had more to say. And so I'm like, we're taking a pause. But I have a lot of guests coming, and I've had a lot of guests that are big industry leaders.
Yeah.
And we like dive into a whole different side of like their mindset behind it, and really get to know like them as a human behind the scenes, and not just their big accomplishments, which I think has been like probably one of the most fun conversations, like sides of podcasting, is like getting to connect with people, like obviously connecting with the listeners. I love it. But I mean, how great is it that you can just be like, hey, you want to be on my podcast? And they're like, yes, sure. And you're like, there's no other reason in life I would have to talk to you other than you to come on my podcast. So yes, please. But yes, I do love it. And thank you so much for all the kind words. It definitely is something that I don't foresee stopping anytime soon. Like, it's just turning 1 and we're just getting warmed up.
Well, good, because I don't know what I'd do if you just cut it off. I'd be a mess over here. So no time soon can we be stopping.
No.
Okay, good. Well, again, JC, thank you so much for chatting with me today. You're the best. I love you.
Well, thank you so much again for having me on.
Absolutely.